Hey everyone, welcome back to Restoration Rescue. In this week's video, we're going to be teaching you some keys to welding. All right, everybody, welcome back to another awesome Saturday video of Restoration Rescue. So first thing we're going to talk about is what we did last week. So last week we came in and finished out our sandblasting on the passenger side. We did a lot of sanding as the sandblaster wasn't keeping up as well as we hoped, but we got it done. Then we came in and we laid some rust reformer just to make sure we killed any of that rust, and then came in and primed it. We did find some holes and things we needed to address this week before we continue on with throwing down our undercoating. So we came in here and we located some rust holes and pinholes, even so much that you can put this key almost all the way in. So what we're gonna be doing today is we're gonna do a little bit different style of a video for you guys and do a almost tutorial on how to weld and how to create a patch panel and put one in. So we have this panel right here we're gonna have to cut out and put a new patch panel in, and we're gonna give you guys some tips, tricks, and keys to welding. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna come in here and mark where we're gonna cut it out. I'm marking really for you guys as I know where I would like to cut it, and I'm gonna come in and pretty much lay a line right down here and then across, make my line a little bit straighter. I want to stay above this weld because this weld has already been done. And then we're going to come in here, we're going to cut down here, and we're going to cut across the top. Obviously my line isn't straight. We're going to try and make it as straight as possible so that we make a perfect square style cut. So it's a lot easier when we go to make our panel to cut out. So first things first is we're going to mark the rest of this, and then I'm going to start cutting it out. All right, so we have the box where we need to go. So now we're going to come in with our grinder and our cutoff wheel, not a grinding wheel, a cutoff wheel, and cut out our box of dirty metal that we need to get rid of. Make sure you guys wear some eye protection. You don't want to get a spark in the eye and get an eye infection or even lose your eye. That's not worth it. And make sure you guys wear your hearing protection because losing your hearing will suck too. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna cut it out and we're gonna take it over to the table and line it up and measure it against some new metal and cut out a new piece. So say goodbye to that dirty, ugly metal. And we look at this side and this looks pretty good. The metal looked nice and thick from the outside, but let's see what it looked like from the inside. And that was bad. So good thing that the sandblaster blew some holes in this. So we went and checked the rest. The rest is fine. Don't know why that one spot is just bad. Like we come in here, this feels nice and thick and strong. So does down here, and so does the rest of it. So this one bad panel, it needs to go. So now what we need to do is we need to walk over to the bench, take out some new metal, trace this, and cut it out so we can put the new metal in. All right, so we have our piece of metal right here, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna line it up, and then we're gonna use this top line as our top half and come in here and draw some markings so that we know where to cut. So we have that, we have this side, and we have the inside that we need to line up like that. So there we go. So we have our box of where we need to cut right here. We're probably gonna come in just a little bit on all of these lines so we have a gap for when we weld, so that we have, like I said, the gap, so when we're welding, it fills in the gap. So let's head over to our board real quick and talk about that. All right, so what we're gonna talk about right here on the whiteboard real quick before we cut this panel out and start welding is the gap. So the gap that you have is gonna determine how good of a bad a weld you have with the other panel. So if, say we draw right here, a piece of panel where we left pretty much no gap in between it and the two pieces of metal butt up, if we try and weld in there, we're just gonna get big, like almost lumps on it rather than the weld penetrating. And that's what welding is all about, is penetration in between the two pieces of metal and making them get together. So now, let's say we come in and we have our original piece of metal and we go too wide. We're gonna have to attempt to build up and make welds to combine them, which is not gonna be strong. This metal is gonna be weak, and when we go to grind it, it's gonna make that weld even weaker, where it's gonna crack and you're gonna have problems. So what we need to do is, when we weld, is we come in and we have our metal. We want a nice, even, small gap. Not a huge gap, just a nice little small gap. And first and foremost, you're gonna leave a little spot, tack weld in there to tack the two pieces together, and just go down and continue that along the piece of metal. And you don't wanna weld like, and the reason we do that is we don't wanna tack every second and go like this, because unfortunately, the metal will start to warp and your panel will start to be like that. Now, if we spread and dissipate our heat as we go, that's not gonna happen, or not gonna happen as bad, and you might end up with a little bit of a curved line like this rather than this. So when we're welding, we wanna have a nice, even hole, gap in between, a gap in between our two pieces, and we weld, and we weld. Then we come back and we do a couple welds there, over here a couple welds, and we just keep going down until all of this is clean and solid and has no holes. We come back and we grind it down. Another benefit, we're gonna look at this from like it's the top half of our two panels together. If we weld a small gap together, we're gonna just get nice little bumps of weld that we can grind down and make flush, and we have our penetration through the bottom. And that's the important part. Let's do that right here because I can see the glare. So we do our welds up here. We have a nice little bump, not too bad. We can always grind that down, but it also penetrates the metal. Now, if we have too big of a gap, you're not gonna get good penetration. You're gonna get penetration, but the penetration is gonna be droopy. It's gonna be like just not a good weld. If we have a big gap, you're gonna leave maybe a little thing, but if you start welding, you're only gonna have a little bit of penetration through the bottom because it's not that good. Now, if our panel is extremely close, what's gonna happen is when you weld, you're gonna get big lumps like this and absolutely no penetration. Penetration is the key to welding. It makes your panel strong and it keeps it together. So now what we're gonna do after we have this little class, we're gonna go cut that piece of metal out. We're gonna start welding and make sure that our gaps are all lined up and good. All right, so here is the panel and it looks amazing. And here is our old one. So if we line it up, there's not that much off of either of them and they look amazing together. So all we need to do now is weld it in. But first, there's some steps that we need to go through before we start welding. So we do have to clean this metal up a little bit on the sides. It's a little rough. You can kind of see it there. It's a little rough. We need to cover that. And we need to take some off this coating, as well as take off some of the truck where that is, to make sure it's nice and even and it's metal to metal. Then we're gonna line it up and weld, and we're gonna walk over to the welder and show you the process of 1, turning it on, and 2, having it set. Ours is pretty set up already, but let's go ahead and grind back this coating so we can get to some welding. right, so here we are at our welder. We have our metal ground down. We also have the truck ground down to where it needs to go. So here we are at the front end of our welder. We have our on-off switch over here. We have our wire speed and we have our voltage. Do not turn the voltage while welding. It even says it right on here. Set it, and that's where it's gonna be until you stop welding, like pulling the trigger. This is a MIG welder. This is a Hobart. It is a 210 MVP. It's done us really well. It has welded our cab very well. And it's pretty self-explanatory on how to set it up. On the side of the welder, there is a chart, and it has whatever your wire thickness is and what it recommends for everything else. So up here is your wire speed. The slower it is, the slower the wire is coming through the gun. Now, the voltage is how hot the element is gonna melt that wire. So if we're here and we have high voltage, the wire is gonna melt inside of my welder, and it's not the welder, inside the gun, and it's not gonna get to the panel. For the metal that we have, the thickness, the 18 gauge metal that we're welding, and the wire speed, not wire speed, the wire thickness that we have, which is 0.23. This is right about where this needs to be set. We can adjust it a little bit faster if we notice that the wire is coming out too long before it melts. It's pretty spot on. Then in the back, we have our gas. We have an argon mix, 75-25, and that thing is excellent. So that helps cool down the welds and helps them just be a better weld. So what we need to do now is we're gonna fire it up and we're gonna start welding. All right, so I have my gun and I'm ready to weld. Except there's a couple more things that we need to discuss before we can start. I'm really excited to just jump in, but I wanna make sure you guys know everything about this. So we have this right here, which is our ground. So what it does is it holds the metal in between and it just creates a circuit pretty much, so that when we're welding, we have a circuit and that's helping melt our wire. So what we need to do is we need to put it pretty close to where we're welding, but not right on top. So I have where the steering rack comes through is where we're gonna put it, and we're gonna start welding. Then there's some equipment that you're gonna need on top of that. So you need a good set of gloves. You probably need some better welding clothes than just a t-shirt and shorts. I know I get a lot of comments on there for doing this, and I probably should go out and get some leathers, but I just haven't. I don't get burned up that much, but I should. Watch today, I'm gonna burn like anything. So we got our gloves and we also have our helmet. So there are two different types of helmets. Let me see if I can get mine back here. Yes, I can. So I have this. This is an auto dimming mask. So when I start welding, it changes colors. So when I go on, it's pretty dark, like it's pretty bright. When I start to weld, it dims. So that's pretty cool. And there's also non-dimming ones, which is the one that Tim has with the awesome like fighter pilot look on it. That one just always stays dark, and when you weld, that's when you begin to see, which is a little difficult for me to weld with. I've tried it. I like to have a light set up with me so that I can see everything I need to see and I don't dim my mask too much. So what we need to do now is set up that ground. We need to get the panel in place with some magnets, and now we can actually start welding. All right, so you can hear in the background that my welder is on and it's running. Our gas is on. You always turn the gas on first before you start welding. So we have everything pretty much set where it needs to go, and our gaps are looking pretty good, except for right here, it's a little wide. Not that big a deal. We're gonna work with it. It's not atrocious. So we have our ground set. We have everything set up for this thing to weld. We have my light here, right over here off to the left. And what we're gonna do first is lay some tacks. So when we go to lay our tack welds, we are going to get across and make almost a pattern around the panel so that we make sure the panel doesn't go anywhere, and then we can start getting rid of our magnets. So once that's good, we'll get those tacked in. And what a tack is we come up here, we hold on for like a second, maybe two, not a very long hold on your button, and you kind of want to make a little bit of a movement with this to make it a nice circular style weld. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay down some tacks. There's one. We're gonna come over here and do another. And we're gonna keep going around the panel and continue to do that. Those are all right, and we wanna hold our torch, or this, near the panel for a second after, so that we make sure that argon is attacking that weld. So those aren't perfect by any means. Of this one up here I kind of missed, and this one is not full. These are pretty good down here as well as over here, and this one I flat out missed again. A little bit is the light, but that's on me. I'm not trying to blame anything else. So those turned out pretty well. So now what we need to do is start going around and go back and finish where I missed. So like right here. And I didn't have a good connection. There we go. There we go. That one's in. That one's better now. So now we have those done. We can probably start taking the rest of our magnets away. So the panel is pretty lined up. We don't have maybe a little bit of a gap here. And all we'll need to do there is take our hammer, which is behind me, and lightly tap on this to even it up. Or you can always take like a screwdriver and push it in, but otherwise we are pretty lined up. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start tacking it and jumping around again until we have enough that we feel comfortable that we can start welding. Hitting the spots. So right here it's a little bit wide. So what we can do is we're gonna start building almost like a bridge to cross it. So as you can see, we had to make a couple welds in there to get it attached. That's a little wide, not what we like. Around here is perfect, right down here is perfect. This is gonna be easy to weld. We're gonna come right up in here and be able to lay nice, beautiful tack welds down. We do have to cover this spot right here and a couple of the overcuts, and that's just because you have a circular blade. So let's continue to just start welding across the panel and get this thing where it needs to go. All right, so as we come in here, you can see we had a little bit of a blow through. Not too bad of a blow through, but we were able to fix it. We had one over here, we were able to fix it as well. And we're just running up and down the sides. So we have some stuff that we need to do. We had a little bit blow through on this panel, which is not usual. But we're gonna continue to keep going around. And there's a couple things I wanna show you and have you guys listen for. When you're welding, you want to have it weld and sound like crackling bacon. Pretty much not like that, but more like something like that. We have that nice sound, almost like crackling bacon, and we just keep working. Here is not that hard, we can start building. Unfortunately, the littler gaps, we just keep working our way along. That was not unique. That was perfect, that sound. Right? That sound is the perfect sound. Hold it a little bit as you go, and just keep working around the panel until it is all welded up. This, we were a little bit low, so I gotta go back and continue to weld in between where it's supposed to be. It's just a little awkward with the camera so you guys could see, but we gotta get up into there and close up those holes and just keep going around the panel and keep welding. So here is the inside of the cab. This is the back side of all our welds that we did today. And we can see some really nice penetration. Penetration is key when we are welding. The penetration is what keeps the metal together. And it's what, so when you weld, there's the two panels that come together. The in-between is what you're shooting for and you hit. The same as when you spot weld two panels together, that's what's creating the gaps. So, or what, if you get good penetration on a spot weld, you can see it through the back. Don't know if I have any out in the open that I can really show us, but right now what we need to do is we're gonna go to the outside of the cab and we're gonna show you those welds and how well, and give you a little bit more tips and keys on the outside. All right, so these welds look pretty good, pretty well put together for the most part. Up here, it's a little more difficult because they were a little bit spread, so we had to build a little bit. But down in here, you can barely tell that there's even welds there right now because they're just so perfect. Down here, we had a little bit of missteps when I was miswelding, but we got that taken care of. Up the side, we had a cut and it made a little bit of a hole, so we were able to take care of that. But this is all welded, and what we need to do now is just go ahead and grind all of those welds back so they look nice and uniform, and try and make this panel look like it was never even out. So that looks pretty good for our first weld. Not horrible. We might have to go back in and toss a couple of welds in there. So let's take a look if we got any light through. No light through right now, which is good. That means we have pretty solid welds, especially with the penetration, even in the weaker spots. Yes, we have some more grinding to do, and that's when we start changing the grit. The grit that we use right there is 36. That's to kill major mounds of it. Then we got to come in and do smaller weld or grinds and just grind it flat, and this thing will look gorgeous. So we gave you guys a guide of welding that we go through. So we want to keep our gaps very tight, because the bigger the gap, the weaker the that. But if you're too tight, then you get no penetration. Penetration is key in welding. So is your machine. So the better you can set your machine, the less blow through, the better welds you get, and you don't have to worry about weak welds. I feel like my welds have improved so much through these couple months of welding. that I feel comfortable sharing with you some of the things that I've learned through the way. Yes, I am not perfect, and I guarantee some of the professional welders who've been welding for 40 years are gonna come on here and tell me, well, no, this is how you do it, this is better. And I appreciate that, actually. I'm not gonna sit here and say that I am the greatest welder to ever be. I am not. And I appreciate those kind of comments when I do get them. I read them, I listen, and I try and learn. I want to learn to be a very good car builder. I want my cars to go down the road, and we won't have to worry about anything. I built an engine, I had to read, I watched YouTube, I watched some of the bigger YouTubers build engines, and that was a blast to do. I didn't get a lot of reading. I did a lot of reading on how to build a transmission, but I didn't get to watch anybody do this transmission really, except for one, and you couldn't really see what he was doing. And the rear end, thankfully I didn't have to rebuild the rear end, because of watching and reading, that sounded horrible. But at some point I'm gonna have to redo that, and we're gonna continue with some body work, some welding, and some filler coming up, and we're gonna throw down our undercoating. It is not bed liner. I know I said that 2 weeks ago. It is an undercoating that can also be used as a bed liner. And a lot of the company that makes it does a lot for off-road type vehicles. So we'll introduce that when we do it. But next week, we're gonna hop on the back of this cab and hopefully cut those two supports, get them over, add the panels in. Gibson did it before, so I know that I'm not 100% off. Again, I have measured this cab more than you could ever imagine to make sure that it is correct. But that's gonna be a wrap for today's video. We'll see you guys next Saturday when we continue working on the 63. And hopefully you guys like this video. If you do, make sure you give me a big like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment about what project you're working on, if you like this style of video, and any comments or critiques that you can give me. I really appreciate it. Make sure you guys smash and use those the codes down below, especially for OSNAP. Get yourself 10% discount, and we'll see you guys next Saturday.